Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Rosanna Francescato, Communications Director with the Clean Coalition. We're really excited today to host this webinar on a hot topic for California, the rolling blackouts in August, the operation of our transmission grid, and reforms that California can enact to avoid situations like this in the future. Now, before we get into more on this, I want to get into just a few quick housekeeping items. First of all, we will email everyone the webinar recording and slides within a couple of business days. Also, all of our webinars are archived on our website, clean-coalition.org, under events. And if you have questions at any time during the webinar, please go ahead and type them in the question pane at the right of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A, which will follow the presentations, but don't wait till then. Just put in your questions when you have them. And if you have any questions about the Clean Coalition, you can contact me at rosanna@clean-coalition.org. And now moving on to today's presentation. We are really lucky to have a great presenter with us today, Loretta Lynch. Loretta is the former president of the California Public Utilities Commission. In that role, she fought against gouging and manipulation by energy sellers throughout the California energy crisis in 2000 to 2002, and she opposed PG&E's first bankruptcy bailout. Loretta is a lawyer, writer, and progressive political activist, and she advises progressive, environmental, and community groups on how to achieve clean, sustainable, and local energy solutions. One of the first critics of energy deregulation, she's a strong advocate for keeping prices reasonable and for converting from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And setting the stage for today's discussion will be Craig Lewis, Executive Director of the Clean Coalition. Craig has over 30 years of experience in the renewables, wireless, semiconductor, and banking industries. He was previously VP of Government Relations at Greenvolts, and he was the first person to successfully navigate a solar project through California's Renewable Portfolio Standard solicitation process. Craig was also the energy policy lead on Steve Wesley's 2006 California gubernatorial campaign. So now I'm going to turn it over to Craig to start the presentation. And remember, you can type your questions anytime in the questions pane, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. So Craig, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rosanna.
There you go.
I'm taking the handoff here, and just let me know if you can see my slides now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, and I'm going to presentation mode. Great. Well, I am thrilled for today's webinar, and that's mostly because we have such a courageous and informed leader here to talk about this very important topic surrounding the transmission grid, how it's operated, regulated, and the shenanigans and market distortions that go on around it. And the fixes, by the way, and a lot of these fixes are very straightforward and easy. And we've got new leadership at the California Independent Systems Operator, and some tremendous opportunity to finally get some long overdue fixes. Before I go into a few slides here to talk about things like transmission access charges, market distortions, and a couple other nuances to set the stage for Loretta, I want to just make sure that it's clear, who the Clean Coalition is and what we're about, because there are misconceptions out there. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. Our end game vision is that we will get to 100% renewable energy. We just don't know whether it's going to take 10 years or 20 years, but we believe it's totally doable within that time frame, the next 2 decades. The key for the Clean Coalition is we're focused on the 25% of that end game electricity, which needs to come from local sources. And local means you're interconnected within the distribution grid and you're facilitating resilience, which is partly possible because you're avoiding any dependence on the transmission grid. The transmission grid is very long and inherently not resilient when you have long supply lines for anything, whether it's electricity, gas. Napoleon attacked Russia with a long supply line of human beings and got slaughtered. Long supply lines are not resilient inherently. Now, if you get to 25% local, you can build a tremendous amount of resilience for your critical community facilities and lots of the rest of your community as well. But getting to 25% from local renewable energy sources means you still need to get 75% of your energy from remote sources. And this is where the biggest misconception about the Clean Coalition comes in. We do believe that there is a role for transmission, a very important role. You still need to get 75% of your energy from long distances, and you will need the transmission grid to do that because you need to get it from where energy is generated, big central generation, to where it's needed, which is where people live and work, which is usually a long ways away. All right. Now, the reason that it's so important that we have Loretta's voice and experience that is still playing in this space is that transmission costs are absolutely out of control. And this is partly because of the way the market is designed. Transmission is allowed a guaranteed return on equity of 12%. There's no other investment that I'm aware of in the world you can get a 12% return on equity guaranteed. And that's true even on the distribution grid in California. Every state, the distribution grid is regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission and similar bodies across the country. And the distribution grid only gets 8% return on equity guaranteed. Now that's still a ton, but 12% is unbelievable. And by the way, transmission investments are 50-year investments. So the utilities and other participating transmission owners get to clip coupons for 50 years at a 12% ROE. It's unheard of. Distribution grid is 8% for 25 years. So market distortions like that, the way that the return on equity is guaranteed, and also the way that the transmission access charges are metered and assessed in California creates massive market distortions and conflicts of interest that steals value from local generation, hurts ratepayers, and preempts energy resilience. So transmission costs are far worse than what they seem on the surface, and that's because operations and maintenance drive 10 times increases to what you see up front. So these tables, I'm not going to go into the details of this. There's lots of information about it on the Transmission Access Charges Campaign website, which is hosted by the Clean Coalition. You can dig into all the gory details as you like. But if you invest $100 in upfront transmission, which by the way is the only cost associated with transmission that you ever hear about is that $100 upfront, there's almost $10 of ratepayer costs associated with that over the lifetime of that $100. So let's talk more realistically. When you avoid $1 billion of new transmission infrastructure investment, you're saving ratepayers closer to $10 billion over the lifetime of that asset. Now, if you optimize the grid for ratepayer savings, then you have to be looking at a lot of local renewables and energy storage. These bar charts are from Southern California Edison, and what it shows is if you deploy 4 gigawatts of local solar, then you can save about $2.2 billion in new transmission infrastructure investments, which, as I said, you've got that order of magnitude greater cost that the ratepayer would actually see if you invested that $2.2 billion. So you can essentially save ratepayers $20 billion in ratepayer savings by just being intelligent about where you site that local solar. And obviously local means it's on the distribution grid close to where people live and work. Transmission costs, by the way, are always borne by ratepayers. So something that these bar charts don't convey appropriately is that if you put 4 gigawatts of local solar in place, meaning interconnected within the distribution grid, if there are upgrades required for the distribution grid, and if there are interconnection costs, which there certainly will be, all of that is paid for by the entities that are deploying the 4 gigawatts of solar, and none of it will ever get reimbursed or paid for by the ratepayers. So the upgrades are free. And this gets completely lost in the way that the California Public Utilities Commission and CAISO and everybody else talks about the difference between transmission distribution investments. It's a real shame, and we need to shed a lot of light on this reality. All right, optimizing the grid for energy resilience requires a lot of local renewables and energy storage. This example that we're looking at here this map is from the Santa Barbara region of California. It's called the Goleta Load Pocket because this entire 70-mile stretch of the California coastline is served by a single connection to the transmission system, and that connection is through the Goleta substation, a transmission to distribution substation up in the foothills of Santa Barbara. This is the perfect location to show how a community microgrid works. That purple trace in this map is a 40-mile transmission route that comes up from Ventura through the heart, through the backside of the mountains, and through the heart of the extreme fire risk, landslide risk, and earthquake risk. This Goleta Load Pocket is incredibly vulnerable to transmission grid outages and distribution grid outages as well, but the transmission line is super vulnerable. The Clean Coalition has an initiative to bring renewables-driven resilience to the Goleta Load Pocket through what we call the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. There's tons of information on the Clean Coalition website about this. There's 2 magic numbers to get 100% resilience to that transmission system failing. And those magic numbers are 200 megawatts of solar and 400 megawatt hours of energy storage. The energy storage is going to be easy. The California Public Utilities Commission has already approved 280 megawatt hours of that. 70% of that 400 megawatt hours is already approved and anticipated to be online by next year. The 200 megawatts of solar is going to be a lot harder. We don't have feed-in tariffs and other market mechanisms to make sure that people can deploy solar in larger spaces than net metering allows. And we need to get solutions to get that 200 megawatts of solar going. And by the way, that 200 megawatts of solar would only require 7% of the rooftops, parking lots, and parking structures in the Goleta Load Pocket region. That means 1 out of every 15 rooftops, parking lots, parking structures, and we hit that 200 megawatts of solar magic number. This is not like putting a man on the moon. What it requires is we need creative and disciplined regulators and other policymakers to make sure that we get the policies and market mechanisms we need to make community microgrids a reality. And it's voices like Loretta's that are going to make this possible. All right, so transmission access charges, what are referred to as TAC, cause massive California market distortions. So just a quick tutorial here on the grid. There's 3 sections of the grid. There's high voltage transmission, there's low voltage transmission, and then there's the distribution grid. Transmission access charges refer to the usage fees for the high voltage transmission and the low voltage transmission. And those are properly assessed, and they're usage fees. They are properly assessed in municipal utility service territories at their respective substations, high voltage transmission to low voltage, and low voltage transmission to distribution. Those are the two places where the transmission access charges are supposed to be and should be metered and assessed, and they are done properly. They're metered and assessed properly at the municipal utility service territories, but in the investor-owned utility service territories, they are done incorrectly. They are done at the customer meter, which means you can't tell whether the energy came from the solar rooftop next door or 1,000 miles away. They're treated exactly the same. That energy is treated exactly the same, regardless of the fact that one of them used the transmission grid and the other didn't use it at all. Okay, this is like having to pay for the Golden Gate toll if you pull into your driveway at home. It doesn't make sense. So we've got to get this fixed. You should pay the Golden Gate toll when you cross the bridge. And that's the way it's done for the Golden Gate Bridge. It's not the way it's done for the transmission access charges, and we need to fix that. What's it do, and how does it distort the marketplace? It distorts the marketplace by making remote generation look a lot cheaper. Hopefully you can see my mouse clicking around. So the way it's done today is this left set of bar charts. And we ignore the transmission access charges because they're assessed the same way, whether it's the energy came from next door or 1,000 miles away. And so the remote generation looks inexpensive. You hear about people saying, you know, oh, Palo Alto or you know, PG&E is getting solar energy for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, 3 cents a kilowatt hour, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's true for just the energy where it's interconnected out in the middle of nowhere. But when you transport that over the transmission grid, you have additional costs there associated with the transmission. There's also this transmission access charges, by the way, are the costs associated with existing transmission grid. There's also savings from avoiding future transmission costs, and these are handled now in the avoided cost calculator, and these are shown in gold. But I'm not going to talk about those at the moment. I'm just going to talk about the transmission access charges. Once we fix the transmission access charges, then the true cost leader in terms of the value of energy comes from clean local energy, because you're going to be looking at the true cost of remote energy, which includes the transmission access charges, while the local energy doesn't have such charges. And by the way, these costs are going up significantly over time. This is a look at what the transmission access charges look like. And I know I'm going over time here, so I'm going to speed this up and just quickly say, if we fix the transmission access charges, the Clean Coalition believes we will save tens of billions of dollars for ratepayers over the next 20 years. And the amount of local energy that we will result in California goes up by a multiplier. So business as usual, we end 20 years from now, we'll have 12.4% of our energy coming from local renewables. If we fix the transmission access charges, we will have a multiplier of that, somewhere between about 20% and 30% of our energy will be coming from local renewables, which will set the stage for the level of resilience we need. This is another shot of this is a block diagram from the Goleta Low Pocket Community Microgrid, the section that is served by one of the 8 66 kV distribution feeders that come out of the Goleta substation. And this particular feeder has a significant number of critical community facilities, including University of California, Santa Barbara, UCSB, which is the emergency sheltering site for all of Santa Barbara County. We've got multiple fire stations. We've got the Santa Barbara Airport and a number of other critical community facilities. I'm going to hand this back to Rosanna now, and let us get on with the main event here with Loretta Lynch.
Great, thank you, Craig. Let me just make Loretta the presenter. Okay, Loretta, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Rosanna, for your leadership in bringing local clean power to California. You know, as Craig just showed, facts matter, and we need all the facts included in our policy making, both because we want an efficient system in California, and we also need to protect our economy. So just put a pin in what Craig was talking about remote generation. That means out-of-state imports, which become important, as we'll see. Let's take a look at what the ISO does and what it did in August that led to the blackouts in California. While my presentation is geared toward people who just want to know what happened, we are going to be looking at some charts and talking in terms that are a bit steeped in energy market jargon. So feel free to ask questions as we get into the weeds of the data. And diving deeper into the causes of the August 2020 blackouts informs California policymakers and all of us about the facts. And facts are important because from there we can craft solutions that work. This is a map of the ISO territory. The ISO is the independent system operator, which operates the California electric transmission grid and operates our electricity markets. A key and critical threshold point to remember is that the ISO was created by state law. It is a state chartered corporation, private nonprofit, created through AB 1890, which was enacted in 1996. That created both the ISO and the power exchange, originally separating the grid operation function from the making of electricity markets function. The Power X imploded during the California energy crisis when it could not control the rampant market manipulation engaged in by Enron and its ilk. And thereafter, the ISO took over running California's electricity markets too. Now, also after the energy crisis, California changed the governance structure of the ISO, again, by state statute, because it's a creature of the state. It replaced the 27-member stakeholder board with a 5-board-member board appointed by the governor and confirmed by the state Senate. And Governor Newsom has now appointed a majority of the ISO's board. But fundamentally, the ISO is a private corporation without any of the controls that automatically adhere to government entities. And as Craig showed, the ISO must run the grid to minimize cost to ratepayers, as state law mandates in Public Utilities Code 345.5. So a quick review. The ISO runs the California's transmission grid. It operates several different markets for electricity and subsets of electricity products. And newly, since 2019, it functions as the reliability coordinator for a large swath of the Western United States. How big? Well, this map represents a rather technical look at the various hubs where the Western United States transmission grids are interconnected. Two entities with legal authority to set standards for transmission grid operation are the WEC and the NERC, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation. So the ISO's markets allow electricity trades throughout the West, and our transmission grid is connected throughout the West. The ISO follows its own rules, which are submitted as tariffs to the FERC, and soon you'll be tired of all these acronyms. It also follows the WEC rules for the West and the NERC national rules of grid operations. And since 2019, the ISO has become responsible for ensuring reliability in a majority of this territory in the Western United States. Now, just last year, the NERC did a comprehensive assessment of reliability, meaning, do we have enough electricity to keep the lights on throughout the United States, looking ahead for several years. It found that this entire Western region had sufficient electricity generation to meet the NERC's reference margin level. But it also found specifically that the California region maintains power reserves for 2020 ranging from a high of 21% to 13.74%, depending on how you calculate reserve power. Bottom line, the NERC's review showed that NERC was satisfied that California had sufficient power to keep the lights on in 2020. This slide takes a look at how California calculates its power needs and electric reserves specifically. The California energy agencies all work together to determine how much electricity California will need each year, and for each condition, summer, winter, high heat, extreme cold, and the like. The ISO exhaustively models and calculates what it thinks summer demand for electricity will be, and it publishes a summer loads and resources assessment every May. First, California calculates 100% of its projected electricity needs. That's the green bar, the green part of the bar. And then the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, requires the utilities and the CCAs, called load-serving entities, to buy 100% of that need that California has calculated. In addition, based on the ISO's own modeling and calculations, the PUC requires an additional 15% of electricity also to be purchased. That's the purple part, and to be made available as reserves when needed. This extra 15% of power purchases, purchased on behalf of all of us and paid for by all of us, is there just to be super conservative, just in case the projections are a little short. And so that all of that planning reserve margin there falls under a broad category called resource adequacy, a term we'll see later. But the key number to note from this slide is that based on the ISO's own calculations of electricity demand for summer 2020, California bought 52,973 megawatts of electricity to meet our anticipated peak load for summer 2020. So what happened? Let's get into it. The ISO called rolling blackouts throughout California because of a lack of supply during a historic heat wave. They called it extreme, that hit California in mid-August. Note that the peak power levels at the time of each blackout on the 14th and the 15th were well below that power amount of 52,973 megawatts that the planning process had already determined to be needed, and that was already purchased. The ISO also suspended one of its electricity trading markets, later noting that its convergence bidding market had affected the ISO's ability to maintain reliability. The ISO also triggered its own emergency authority, called the CPM, to enter into its own market and buy power to keep the lights on. So that's what happened in August when you were hearing on the news, conserve, conserve, blackouts are coming. This graph, or these graphs from the ISO, show the actual hour-by-hour demand, electricity demand, on August 14th and 15th, the days of the blackouts. Note that demand, even at peak, meaning the highest point when we're using the most, was well below the highest electricity demand that California had experienced before, over 50,000 megawatts. And at the time of the actual blackouts, demand had dropped from that peak. That's called the net peak demand. Also note that for 10 of the last 20 years, peak demand in California was higher than 46,000 megawatts. So California has experienced and knows how to plan for electric load over 46,000 megawatts and higher. And just a word about high heat and high demand. We all probably remember all the TV and government alerts in August and September about conserve, conserve, conserve power during an extreme heat storm caused by climate change, where temperatures in California broke records and Death Valley experienced the hottest temperatures it ever has. And certainly, climate change is causing higher temperatures, and we need desperately to address that fact. But just because it's extraordinarily hot in California, it does not necessarily equate to extraordinary electricity demand. Especially during these COVID times, factories, office buildings, theaters, restaurants, and all sorts of major electricity users were not in use and were dark. Now, while all of us at home are using more power than usual, and my electric bill certainly reflects that, California as a whole has been using less power at peak than usual. So despite the messaging that climate change is here, so therefore we have supply shortages, high heat does not always translate into extraordinary demand in California, especially during COVID, and especially on a weekend. August 15th was a Saturday, when once again, so many factories and large buildings were not in use. And these facts matter because we need to understand what, there we go. So this slide is just a list of what the ISO itself reported as the root causes of the August 2020 blackouts. Planning, and these are root causes they reported to the governor. They boil down to, first, our electricity planning processes haven't been designed to address an extreme heat storm. Second, they claim that as California transitions to clean power, resource planning targets have not led to sufficient electricity resources that can be relied upon to meet demand, and that resource availability problems were amplified during this August heat storm. And then third, market practices exacerbated the supply challenges. So let's get to the root of that problem. Oops. You saw this graph before, but now we overlay the peak demand on the blackout days with the planned for demand. We can see that California did plan for the levels of demand we saw during the extreme heat storm, and the utilities were required to buy reserves to meet exactly that demand. This is a different presentation showing what the peak demand was and how California had planned for and actually purchased the electricity resources needed to meet that August peak demand. The Foundation for Resilient Societies analyzed the planned need. I want to go back because this is an important slide. The planned resources to meet that need and the actual resources available. And in every case, California had planned for and possessed enough electricity resources to meet the demand that we saw in the August extreme heat storm. Slide 12 shows the level at which California and all grid operators call flex alerts and power emergencies. According to national standards, remember those WEC and NERC and folks like that? A stage 2 emergency is not called unless one reaches less than 6% in reserves. Well, California had 8.9% in electricity reserves, according to David Marcus's calculations as reported in the New York Times, and that his calculations were derived from real-time data on the ISO's website during the blackout days. So why was California blacked out? In the next slide, here's where we're going to get a bit into the weeds, as I have reproduced the ISO's own charts of what happened from their preliminary root cause analysis. I want to apologize in advance for the jargon on these charts, but I want all of us to see what the ISO's charts tell us. This chart shows the ISO's carefully calculated May 2020 forecast of demand in the orange line, the darker orange line, charted against what the actual demand was, represented by the yellow stair-step lines. As we can see, on August 14th and 15th, forecasted demand tracks actual demand almost exactly. You got to tip your hat to the ISO. They modeled it all correctly. And that means that California bought electric resources that the ISO had modeled in order to meet this demand. But the third line here is key and critical, the gray line. That shows what the ISO's day-ahead market showed demand would be for August 14th. And as we can see, that gray line comes in significantly lower than the forecast and modeling said it would be. But remember, by August 13th, we knew already that an extreme heat wave was coming. So what did the ISO do? Instead of following its carefully modeled forecast, the orange line, and even instead of sounding the alarm that the August 13th day-ahead market was surprisingly much lower than the models and the forecasts, it looks like the ISO followed the market forecast and failed to follow the carefully constructed demand forecast in the face of the approaching extreme heat wave. So what does that mean in real life? This slide, also taken from the ISO's root cause analysis, shows the electricity exports that the ISO allowed to leave California, or at least allowed to leave the ISO's balancing authority, hour by hour on August 13th, 14th, and 15th. And we can see something very troubling in this chart. On August 14th, as Californians are being begged to conserve power, the ISO allowed over 4,000 megawatts of electricity to be exported out in the middle of an extreme heat wave, despite the carefully constructed and planned for demand forecasts. We also see something else, helpfully shown in red by the ISO's chart makers. The red lines show the portion of the exports allowed to leave during that extreme heat storm that are called lower priority exports. Why allow exports at all during an extreme heat wave, or frankly at any time when supply is short? And why allow lower priority exports? Just because you have a rule that allows such a nonsensical action doesn't mean the ISO should take that action. Getting even geekier here, here's the ISO's next chart plotting the exports represented by the dotted navy line over the imports and all the other supplies that were available in California on those key dates, the blackout days. We can see that California had plenty of imports in the mornings, represented by the blue portion of those bars, But as exports increased, necessarily imports decreased because electrons run on transmission lines according to the laws of physics. So what we can see from all these charts is that California planned appropriately and correctly, it turned out, and purchased appropriately and correctly, it turned out, enough electricity to keep the lights on during the August extreme heat storm, and that those resources should have been available both at peak and at net peak. Net peak being as solar cycles off and other resources cycle on as the sun goes down. But the ISO's export actions, and perhaps other actions, punched a hole in the bucket of California supply reliability when it allowed extraordinary power exports at the most key and critical times during the heat storm. So that leads us to the third root cause listed by the ISO. What market practices exacerbated the supply challenges? And I define exacerbated the supply challenges as equaling caused electricity supply shortages. Let's take a look at what the ISO knew about the functioning of its numerous electricity markets before the extreme heat wave and before the blackouts. Well, these next slides show that the ISO knew plenty, and it knew more than enough to be worried, very worried about how its markets allowed practices that could hurt reliability and hurt the ISO's ability to keep the lights on. Frankly, it was hard to choose from the myriad warnings that the ISO's own market monitor has been sounding for at least the past 3 years. I didn't go back farther than that to see what the market monitor was concerned about, because the market monitor has been concerned about plenty since 2017. So here, note that the market monitor's concerns about capacity. So here, the market monitor warned again and again that market power could exist and that the ISO needed to take care of that. And that some of the contracts that the ISO uses for reliability can't stop that market power, which means manipulation. The monitor also has been warning for years that the ISO needs to require power owners to bid power into the market when needed, and that hasn't happened yet. But let's talk specifically about those imports. Remember what Craig talked about in terms of local generation versus out-of-state generation. The market monitor has warned for years that capacity-only imports, which are not connected to actual physical power, have real problems. And note that the market monitor's concerns about capacity-only imports could easily be taken care of if California focused on in-state local power sources, which also concomitantly provides good jobs to Californians. So, not to get into the weeds, but, well, we are in the weeds, so let's keep going. So, basically, the ISO allows contracts for resource adequacy, those reserve power contracts we discussed earlier, to be for capacity only, which means they don't actually have to have any physical power connected to the contract payment. That may be good for markets, but as the market monitor warns, and has been warning, it's bad for reliability. So given what we've seen, how likely is it that planning and purchasing of reserves created the problem, or that our clean energy transition created the problem? When we balance it against the known problems and how the ISO runs the electricity markets in the transmission grid. Sadly, the market monitor's warnings seem to have been falling on deaf ears. Public Citizen in Washington, D.C. found that when the blackouts were called, not surprisingly, prices spiked a lot. We need much more information about just how much and for how long prices spiked in California. But more disturbingly, in that third bullet, on August 17th, the ISO's former CEO came out swinging, blaming state officials for not planning properly and initially blaming climate change and renewable power, although those statements were somewhat walked back in later days. And the ISO's communications machine kept selling the message that a lack of supply caused the blackouts, and not surprisingly, reporters and headline writers especially responded. And California was told poor planning, climate change, and a lack of supply was to blame. Now, misleading reporters isn't a good idea, but aside from misleading reporters, this false narrative has real consequences. Just like in the energy crisis, when Enron's false narrative that California was to blame for not building enough power plants took hold in the Bush administration, Trump immediately took to Twitter to pin the blame on California. Politicizing the facts hurt California, just like it excused the Bush administration for helping California back in 2001 for 6 crucial months as we drowned in market manipulation and exorbitant demands and prices from Enron and its cronies as they played us like a fiddle. So we need the facts, and we need to face and accept the facts in order to solve the problems that exist with California's transmission grid and its electricity markets. So let's review the facts. What did the ISO know? It knew that it allowed significant exports right up to the time of blackouts. It knew that we had actually accurately projected summer 2020 demand, but it didn't tell us that. It also knew from its own market monitor and from others that its market rules were lax and ripe for market manipulation. I also want to highlight, and I don't discuss a lot of the issues of which plants were out when that the ISO goes through in its preliminary root cause analysis, but it did fail to deploy operational measures to assure power availability this last summer. For instance, it allowed planned plant outages, meaning, yeah, you can go down for repairs in the summer when we need your power the most, without requiring those plant operators to provide substitute power. So we've done a little bit of a deep dive into the data and the causes. I know it's a bit wonky and a bit in the weeds, but let's talk about the real world consequences of all this information. Why does it matter? It matters because California's statutory priorities, remember from the map picture, require the ISO to manage the grid and electricity markets for the benefit of California's electricity consumers and to follow our health and safety and environmental laws. Why? Because we need to protect our economy. So the next slides show just a few of the real world consequences when you have blackouts. Shuts down public transportation. That causes a rippling effect across our economy and real costs for local governments. Really affects public health and safety. We saw this during the energy crisis, and frankly, we saw it this summer too. You know, wasted money to have to provide backup power because you can't count on power in California, which has one of the 10 largest economies in the world. That has to be changed. And real health and safety consequences for real people, not only in food waste and economic loss to anybody who requires refrigeration or air conditioning, but Californians with disabilities face serious health consequences if they can't keep their medical equipment running 24/7, and we have to protect them. But also, blackouts in this instance, in August, and the threat in September caused real-world consequences for our environment. The August blackouts led our state water board to reverse its long-standing decade-old policy to retire old, stinky, once-through-cooling gas plants. 7 plants had refused to comply with the State Water Resources Control Board 2010 order to either retrofit their facilities or retire. And instead, because of the threat of a lack of supply, they were granted years of additional operation on September 1st. Now, the Water Board had already found that those plants and the way they operate harm our ocean environment and our air. And they're going to apparently continue to do so. And also, the grid operation led the governor to declare a state of emergency in both August and in September. And that state of emergency, among other things, suspended all permit limits for air pollution throughout California, meaning stinky, dirty fossil plants could run like heck. So where do we go from here to prevent these problems again? Well, first, let's admit the facts. Yeah, we know there were exports and significant exports despite heat waves and high demand. We also know from the ISO's own report that it allowed planned plant outages in the hottest summer months without requiring substitute replacement power, which it has the authority to require but did not exercise. We also know that that preliminary report fails to identify all the power plants that were offline on critical days, much less explain why. But we also know something else. The California municipal utilities, meaning the locally government-owned utilities, did not experience supply problems in the extreme heat storm, and did not black out any of their customers because of a lack of supply or transmission constraints. And nor did neighboring states, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, experience supply shortages or even call a flex alert during the time that California was experiencing blackouts. So everybody else could manage their grid and manage their supply. Why not California? We need more answers from the ISO and from California policymakers. And these are just a few of the answers the unanswered questions that we need to have the answers to. But most importantly, what will all these grid and market choices that the ISO took in August and September cost California's businesses and families? Because state law controls, and under California law, we are entitled to have our transmission grid and markets run for our benefit, to maximize the availability of electricity, to meet California consumers' needs, and to minimize the costs on ratepayers. And of course, the ISO is required to comply with California laws protecting public health and the environment. A note of hope. California appoints the ISO's board and sets the ISO's priority by California law. And because of its corporate form as a public benefit nonprofit corporation, California state law gives our Attorney General more authority over the ISO's corporation. And I, like Turn, think that it's time for the Attorney General to investigate what happened at the ISO. And more than that, the ISO's market practices that can't keep the lights on. But as we do that, we have to balance costs with reliability. We can't allow the ISO to go buy power like a drunken sailor just to keep the lights on. As Craig showed, paying Cadillac prices for jalopy infrastructure hurts our economy, and I would argue it violates Section 345.5. So really, the ISO's priorities need to be reversed. Right now, from what we've just talked about, the ISO clearly puts markets first and reliability second. And California needs reliability and least cost operation of the grid first. Note that state law does not prioritize markets at all. There's some hope because we have a new leadership at the ISO. And I hope that that new leadership will take a look at the facts and will not feel compelled to be an apologist for what's happened before, but instead will work from the facts to follow state law and protect all Californians and our economy. Thanks very much for this opportunity to talk to you. Craig?
Great. Thanks, Loretta, for your excellent presentation, as always. We do have a number of questions coming in, so let's get right into those. And here's one from Rick Brown, who's chair at Terra Verde. He asks, isn't the simple explanation that CAISO's reliability role for the West conflicted with its demand role for California?
Well, Rick, you said it, not me. So here's the deal. That's why I've emphasized that CAISO is a California corporation under California law. It was created by California to serve California. It has taken on other roles. And do those other roles conflict with its mandatory primary mission? That is what I believe an independent evaluation needs to determine. For instance, the Attorney General needs to take a look at exactly that. It is not lost on me that in 2019, the CAISO took on additional responsibilities for other territory outside California to ensure reliability. We need to know whether they put other states' interests ahead of California at a time when other states were not experiencing the same problems. So Rick, I'm with you.
Great. Here's a question from James Dodenhoff, principal at Silent Running LLC. James asks, do very high temperatures contribute to a higher level of outages, or put differently, is our local distribution system capable of handling very high ambient temperatures?
So James, there were some equipment failures caused by high temperatures, and not only just a blip of a high temperature, but an exceedingly long time of a high temperature. But that is kind of thus as it ever was with the electric system, right? Our electric distribution grid across the United States. You can always have a transformer blow or a line go down. And as we all in Edison or PG&E territory know, That happens for a variety of reasons, not just high temperatures. But that is localized and easily fixed. This is not what happened on August 14th and 15th, and not what was threatened to happen over Labor Day. What happened is we experienced not enough power to keep the lights on. Why? We know it wasn't for planning. We know it wasn't procurement. What we do actually really know is that it was how the ISO ran its grid and its markets. And that's a much bigger issue than does a particular utility need to upgrade or cover its transformers? Sure, they do. And we do need, and heat does affect that, but that's not what caused these problems.
Great. I figured your answer would be. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. The high temperatures increase congestion on the transmission, which gets in the way of deliverability to be able to get that energy from far distances away to where you need it, where people live and work. It also increases the inefficiency of the line, which means you're going to have more significant losses of that energy. So you might lose 10% of the energy that's generated before it actually gets to a load. And also, high temperatures increase the risk of public safety power shutoffs, which means nothing's going to be coming over those lines. And all of this really points to, my slides about community microgrids, which is where we need to get a significant percentage of our energy generation from local renewable energy sources combined with energy storage to ensure resilience and to ensure the most efficient delivery of energy. The most efficient energy delivery you can have is a solar, a solar facility right on top of your roof, right? There is no line losses or congestion losses from that. So the high temperatures are important for a variety of reasons, and just one of many factors that really point to the energy system of the future needs to have significant levels of local renewables associated with it.
And I agree with Craig. Local renewables really would solve a lot of these problems. But I would note that for the dates of August 14th and 15th, at least, the ISO has reported that congestion was not a problem. And when you look at some of the prices on the nodes, the real-time prices from the ISO's map, those price increases were not due to congestion by and large. So for those particular blackout days, it wasn't congestion. It was something else.
Great. Yeah, all great points. We have a question from Robert Bryn, Senior Assistant Attorney General at the California Department of Justice, who asks, which market participant scheduled the exports or participant? Was it PG&E? And do you see any connections with the fact that PG&E was looking for money to settle bankruptcy claims?
Oh, Rob, we should have an offline conversation. This is what I know. The ISO makes it extremely difficult to be able to track the actions of the scheduling coordinators on its system. It's a multi-step process. I have been trying to perform that multi-step process. There are troubling signs, but I don't have any conclusions to reach at this moment. Someone with perhaps subpoena authority might find it more easily.
Right. So let's move on to Joe Suska, Senior Management Analyst at City of Culver City, who asked, did the contracts to export excess electricity allow the CAISO to immediately and temporarily suspend doing so to meet California's energy demand? Does that make sense?
I think I know what Joe's talking about, which is, did the export contracts require exports regardless of the condition of the California grid? And I have not read all of the export contracts. It's my understanding that at the very least, the lower priority exports would not have had any of those kinds of conditions, because by the ISO's own definition, they are lower priority. And they, their own charts showed that they constituted the bulk of, or at least half of the exports that were occurring on right up until the times of the blackouts. That said, for emergency purposes, all sorts of contracts can be abrogated for the integrity of the grid. And the question is, does the ISO consider the integrity of the grid to include not blacking out California when they had purchased 8.9% in reserves, but allowed those reserves, the hole in the bucket theory, to drain outside of California?
And Joe also asked, why would CAISO allow power plants to shut down in the summer when we anticipate peak demand during heat waves?
As I said, Joe, yeah, we got some unanswered questions here, and that's a big one for me. Because the ISO makes much of the fact that 2 plants kicked offline unexpectedly, Blythe and Pinoche. But when you add up the megawatts represented by those plants, it's less than 800 megawatts. And so given that we had purchased in reserve almost 7,000 megawatts, 800, 7,000, we've all been obsessed with vote counts and probabilities. We know that 800 is nowhere near 7,000. And so then we know that a 400 megawatt plant was allowed to go off planned. We don't know how many other plants were allowed to have planned outages. Because there are several plants that were offline in the data, when you dig into the depths of the data, that are not at all discussed in the ISO's preliminary root cause analysis. And I sure hope that they fix that in their final analysis.
Great. We have a couple of related questions on policy and markets. Mark Mortensen, a research volunteer at Sonoma County RCPA, asks, how can concerned activists get leverage with the CPUC so they make the necessary policy changes to increase renewables in California? What will get their attention? And Rafael Olivas, business architect, asks, what are the best levers that law and market can apply to ensure that the recommendations are accepted?
Well, first, Mark from Sonoma, I agree that the PUC needs to be incorporating more facts. A lot of the modeling they use is severely outdated, and that means has real world consequences, because if you take even 2018 prices for solar and wind, that distorts the actual facts when you do the model, because 2020 prices are so much lower. And in some circumstances, the PUC is using even older data than 2018. So I certainly have been pushing to make sure that the best data is used by the PUC and in the most fulsome way. As Craig explained in his slides, if you don't take into account all the costs and you just presume that out-of-state costs, that out-of-state wind, where it's produced, let's just take a number. If it's 5 cents to produce wind in Kansas and it's 6 cents to produce wind in California, that's not the equivalent price, because you have a transmission cost to bring that wind from Kansas to California. And if you don't include all the transmission charges that make that wind come here, and as we all know, it's kind of a fiction, the Kansas wind never actually reaches California. Once again, grid physics, then you don't compare apples to apples, basically. So it is clear that the PUC in its IRP, the Integrated Resource Planning process, in its RA proceeding, the Resource Adequacy proceeding, and in other proceedings need to have the best and the most up-to-date and the most fulsome data in order to design the power supply of the future. And I think they're doing a good job. They could be doing a much better job, and we all need to push them to do that. How to do that? I would suggest you talk to your legislator and educate your legislators about some of this deep dive information, because it's just too easy to say, don't look behind the curtain about how the system really works. But you got to pull the curtain back and see if this is just the Wizard of Oz pulling levers, or see if it's a rational system that can be easily explained. And Raphael, I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Oh, that question was, what are the best levers that law and market can apply to ensure that recommendations are accepted?
I don't know what law and market means, but I do know that our governor and our legislature are in control here. They're in the driver's seat if they want to be. So we should make sure that they want to be. And of course, the Attorney General is a beacon of hope to make sure that market manipulation is not getting out of control once again. You know, California was bamboozled by Enron and its cronies 20 years ago, and shame on them, right? They fooled us once. But if we allow the sons of Enron to fool us again, shame on us.
I would also add, if you look in the Clean Coalition site for policies and market mechanisms, we have a lot to say about all kinds of things like the transmission access charges issue that Craig was alluding to, and also the utility business model. There's a lot that can be done. Moving on,
Actually, you know what? Thank you, Rosanna. You remind me that why don't we just make the ISO adopt the market monitor's suggested fixes to their markets? That'd go a long way.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a nice answer. Very simple and effective. So we have a bunch more questions. So for anyone who can stay, we'll go a few minutes over. Robert Perry, principal consultant at Synergistic Solutions, asks about the principle of fully integrating the cost of delivery into the price of energy. You were talking, and Craig also mentioned the high cost of transmission. He's suggesting that the cost of an electron would increase as it travels over the transmission and distribution infrastructure, and that would level the playing field for distributed energy resources. And given projected increases to the system load driven by transportation electrification, which will be coming, would still generate enough revenue for infrastructure investment at both transmission and distribution levels. So any thoughts on that?
I think Robert has a great idea, and that we need to get California policymakers to take a serious look at what he's proposing, because it sounds like he's proposing something that's pretty in depth, and that's exactly what we need. Just count all the costs, count all the ballots, count all the costs, and then let's see what the results are.
Yeah, and I you know, what Loretta was saying earlier about wind in Kansas, you know, you've got all sorts of transmission charges between Kansas and the CAISO boundary, and then within CAISO you've got the high voltage transmission access charges, you've got the low voltage transmission access charges, and then there's distribution charges on top of that too. So we've already got the capability of metering and assessing transmission costs outside of California. Those costs, they're called wheeling charges. Those already exist. They're very you know, manageable and identifiable. Within California, we have the ability to meter and assess those as well. It's just that we don't do that.
Yeah, good point. Okay, we have a question from Thomas Marihart, sales engineer at Western Energy Systems, who asked to please comment on the availability and adequacy of California's spinning reserves during blackouts and the consequent limits of preventing blackouts with capacity versus reactive power sources. Is there a required bare minimum portion of local generation that must come from reactive power, aka synchronous resources, to maintain grid stability?
So Thomas, I think your question is a little above the pay grade of this presentation, because if you and I engage in that conversation here, we're going to lose the hundreds of people who are still on the line. However, it is a good demonstration of just how complicated and, by the way, jargon-filled electricity markets are and electricity procurement products are. But spinning reserves are a really important component of reliability, and getting the price of them correct and making sure that they actually show up is a really important component too. So for instance, one of the, where are we here? I'm not going to just randomly click around. So yeah, one of the issues here is, do you count as ready power plants that are old and take 12 to 24 hours to get up to speed to be able to provide power? I think that might well have happened here. We should take a look at that, because if you do, and then you experience an unexpected surge in demand, you can't count on that, let's just call one through cooling plant that takes 24 hours to get electrons onto the system as actually reliable. So why pay them for the 15-minute reliability standard when you know they can't meet it? right? That's one question. So you got to make sure your spinning reserves are in fact spinning and available at a moment's notice if you're going to pay them like it's spinning and available at a moment's notice. And so some of the deep weeds of the ancillary services market and the spinning reserves markets and all those contracts really do need to be, let's just say, taken a sharp pencil to, because we're paying, but we're not getting.
I'm going to add a little bit to that because I really like the way that Loretta just gets to first order principles here, and she talks a lot about the physical layer of the grid, and there's 3 dimensions that need to be managed from a physical layer standpoint on the grid, and that's balancing frequency, voltage, and power. When you look at the so-called duck curve, the only thing you're looking at is balancing power. But if you're looking at the balancing frequency, what really matters with that is the speed with which you bring power capacity on or off the grid, depending on which way you need to move the frequency. So this is where you get to spinning reserve, is how fast can you bring power capacity on or off the grid. And energy storage is superior to actual spinning, rotating assets. So again, we have energy storage has a big role to play here. It can obviate the need for the old style, rotating synchronous condensers, et cetera. And it's a myth. People that talk about spinning reserve, it's a misnomer, because you don't have to have anything spinning anymore in order to have that speed of reaction that you need to balance things like frequency. And by the way, just to complete the trifecta here, reactive power is all about location. Reactive power, balancing voltage requires reactive power, and reactive power decays very quickly over distance. So the best way to balance voltage, which by the way, voltage balancing is driven by loads, which means you're close to where people live and work, because that's where all the loads are. So you need to get that reactive power as close to the loads as you can. Again, that points to local renewables and local energy storage as the right solution, the best solution for balancing voltage, power, and frequency.
And Craig's exactly right. I short shrifted the value and the benefit of energy storage here in this presentation because I was really just looking at what did ISO say was the problem. But on that macro level, we are at a historic transition when it comes to energy and specifically electricity. It's almost like 1920, but it's certainly not like 1950 when new sources of electricity production were being developed and came online commercially. So we, California, the US, and frankly the world, are going to get to a clean, sustainable, renewable system of sources for electricity. The only question is, how fast are we going to get there, and how hard are we going to make it on ourselves before we get there? And clinging to the old ways and clinging to the resources we have right now at our disposal without not only accepting but welcoming in the new amazing technological developments that have happened and been commercialized in the last 5 years is kind of like Monsters, Inc. Why would you keep powering your cities through screens when you could power them through laughs? But you can't power them for both screams and laughs. You just gotta take the plunge and make the change.
I almost feel like ending on that note, but we have a few more questions. So if you have a few more minutes, I'd like to get through a couple more. We have one here from Christina Shi, Director of Business Development at Clearway Energy. She says, thank you for a fascinating presentation. Could you expand more on your point around the market failure with the capacity-only imports? Was it driven by weak contractual obligations for power owners, or was there an arbitrage opportunity to not bid into the power market?
Oh, both and more. Okay, I'm just going to have to click back through some of these slides because you just got to read what the market monitor is saying. And this, just by the way, is only some of the many problems that the market monitor has been clearly laying out for years. So note the first one. When you have a resource import capacity bid at near the 100,000 bid cap, what can happen is they can bid so high they know they're not going to be taken. And then that releases their obligation to be available. So then when you really need them in the real-time market, they're not there. And they can go out of state, or they can wait for the price to go up. They can wait for the ISO to trigger its capacity procurement mechanism and buy them back at any price. So the market monitor spells it out in that PUC filing from March. They also spell it out in June, and they also spell it out at FERC in April, and they also spell it out many, many times last year. So yes, does it create a market or an arbitrage opportunity? Oh yeah. And does the convergence bidding market, let's just say, expand those arbitrage opportunities? Absolutely. And they must have, because otherwise, why did the ISO suspend its convergence bidding markets? The ISO isn't really saying why. And that's one of my unanswered questions here. Why did the ISO's experience with its convergence bidding market cause it to conclude that the convergence positions may be facilitating demand schedules in the day-ahead market? Remember that gray line? Demand was lower than it should have been, while the ISO faced the possibility it would have to curtail the schedules based on what the system could actually support physically to maintain reliability. In that jargon lies the answer to Christina's question. Arbitrage city. So why did it take a blackout to end at least one of the mechanisms of arbitrage? Unanswered questions that Californians deserve to know.
Great. Here's a question from Claire Broom, adjunct professor at Emory University. Can you comment on Burbridge's comment that reserves had to be held in case Diablo went offline?
Reserves are supposed to be there to use in the case of need, right? Now, there were a lot of different assertions made in those early days, like, oh, it was our over-reliance on solar and wind, which are inherently unreliable, and all sorts of other assertions that were walked back. There too, I probably should put on the unanswered questions, Claire. What was going on with Diablo, and why aren't they talking about it? If there was a problem, we need to know that. And certainly the people of San Luis Obispo and Avila Beach and everyone else needs to know that. So what was happening? Transparency and sunshine is the answer here for all of us to have our comfort level raised, but also to get to the facts, because we can't fix the problem without knowing the facts. But the first questioner actually raises a concomitant issue, which is, was it Diablo, or was it the ISO's focus on making sure that the other states maintained their reliability? And did California get sacrificed on the altar of the ISO's new position as reliability coordinator throughout the West? Inquiring minds deserve the answers.
Yeah, and I think this one from David Brown, principal engineer at SMUD, is related. I've heard that the ISO has difficulties in the transition hour from low-cost solar to higher-cost thermal resources as the sun goes down. Did this play a role?
Well, they said it did, but as you saw, net peak was significantly lower than peak. And it's not as if we don't know how to do that. It's not as if California hasn't been experiencing the transition from solar when the sun goes down to gas and other resources. Note Craig's point on energy storage and how available and reliable and quick that is. For, let's say, decades, since Jerry Brown's first administration in the 70s, when we put in significant wind and solar. And David probably knows more than anybody else working at SMUD that the munis handle that transition all the time. So is it an engineering problem to be solved? Yes. Is it rocket science? No. Does every balancing authority solve that problem every single day of every single year when the sun goes down? Yes.
Great. I think we'll end there with the questions, as we're at almost 12:15, but I just want to leave you with a couple other things. And thank you, Loretta, for this awesome presentation. Thank you to everyone for joining our webinar today. As I mentioned, we will email everyone the webinar recording and slides within a couple of business days. And we will also post the recording and slides on our website under events. You can go here under events. You'll also find our upcoming events. And I wanted to call out one in particular, which is coming up on December 9th. And that's going to be CAISO presenting on this same issue, as well as other issues that are of interest to our audience, such as the energy imbalance market, transmission access charges in California, and the implementation of FERC Order 2222. So please go under events, upcoming events to find that. We will also send you the link and the recording and slides. Check out our other upcoming events. And thanks again for joining us today. Thanks also to our presenters, and have a great rest of your day.